Hello, it's Chino here. If you like aggressive openings, you're in the right place. Today, I'd like to examine a game between um, Paul Morphy with white against two amateurs, the Duke Karl and Count Isouard. And this game featured a Philidor defense. And I'll just show you. This game was a good example of how not to play the Philidor. So Murphy had white, and Duke Karl and Count Isouard had black. I mean, they were both amateurs, while Paul Murphy was a professional. So that would explain why we see some of the inaccuracies in the game. So yeah, we had these opening moves, which are typical of the Philidor defense, and now d4 is a key move for white to try and define what's going on in the center. Now, after pawn to d4, black played bishop to g4, and this is the first point. Bishop to g4 is a poor move. Just going back one move. The normal moves here for black are pawn takes d4. That's one move. And the other try is knight to f6. The point being that after pawn takes e5, knight takes e4 is a playable line for black. I'm just going back, and one final option for black here would be knight to d7. So those are the typical moves you find in theory, but just going back to the game, black played this move, bishop to g4. Now the problem with this move is after white's next move, pawn takes e5, black's forced to capture on f3, because if he doesn't and goes, for example, pawn takes e5, well, queen takes d8 check, king takes d8, knight takes e5 would leave white a pawn up. So just going back to that position after bishop to g4 and pawn takes e5, and we see the black's forced to play bishop takes f3 to prevent the sequence we just saw. Okay, so queen captures on f3, and now pawn takes e5 from black, regaining the pawn. Okay, but the problem for black here is that bishop to c4 threatens checkmate in one move on f7, so black has to do something about this, and in this game played a reasonable developing move, knight to f6, to stop the checkmate. But white continues to threaten f7 by going queen to b3, and as you can see, the two pieces pointing at the f7 square, and this is a difficult position for black, as you can tell, because the b7 pawn is also threatened, and black can't defend both at the same time. So for example, queen to d7 will lose after queen takes and b7, winning the rook. It's just worth noting here that even queen to c6 isn't possible because of this move, bishop to b5. So going back to that position after queen to b3, black played queen to e7. The problem with this is the queen now blocks the bishop from developing. Although it defends f7, it stops black from developing kingside. And now knight to c3 from white. If we go back just one move, you're probably wondering, why doesn't white capture on b7? Well, white can capture on b7. Should still be losing for black. After queen to b4 check, queen takes b4, bishop takes b4, and c3. Okay, so just going back to a position, so let's go back. We had this position, queen to e7, and we said, well, queen takes b7 should win, but it's not quite as good as game continuation, knight to c3. Now, the point here is this knight can appear on d5 or b5 in some variations, possibly after bishop to g5. So black decides to do something about a knight jump to b5 or d5 and plays pawn to c6 first. Well, white continues with his plan all along, which is bishop to g5. And this move is a little bit annoying because it maintains this pin on the queen. And if that queen should go away, white would destroy black's pawn structure on the king side. Okay, so in the game, black, played followed up with pawn to b5, but just going back and thinking of alternatives for black after bishop to g5, h6 doesn't quite help black, because after bishop takes f6, note that queen takes f6 isn't possible because the queen takes b7, so pawn takes f6 and castles queenside, and we see that white has fully developed pieces, has control of the open file, and black's pieces are a bit clumsily placed, and not to talk about this weak square in the position. I mean, a knight to e2 to g3 would control that square. I mean, this is a very good positional position for white, and should be an easy win. Okay, so going back to the game, to the position after bishop to g5, we've just seen that h6 doesn't work because of this pawn bishop takes knight exchange. How about knight b to d7 to stop this pawn structure being destroyed? But the problem is now b7 is unprotected. So yeah, so just going back, it's hard to recommend a better move for black in this position than the move he played in the game, which was pawn to b5, hoping that the bishop would retreat. But here comes the brilliancy in the game. Knight takes b5. And yeah, it turns out that, okay, so white's now a pawn up, well, temporarily a pawn up, but it turns out that white spotted the weakness of this a4 to e8 diagonal. So game continued, pawn takes knight, bishop takes pawn check, and now this knight can't defend, otherwise the queen is lost to the bishop. So the only move is knight b to d7, and now castles queenside. So already we see there's a threat of bishop takes d7, taking advantage of the point that the knight can't recapture because of this pin, annoying pin. Okay, so black plays rook to d8, about the only move in the position. But then after a mini combination, rook takes d7. Note that the knight still can't capture on d7 because of this pin. So the rook has to capture on d7. But white takes advantage of the pin with rook to d1, attacking, this pin piece a second time. Oh, and now black decided, well, I'll come out of the pin so the knight at least can defend the rook. And so black went queen to e6. Just looking at alternatives, if we go back, take the queen back, queen to b4 is another try, but this still loses after bishop takes f6. Note that black doesn't have time for queen takes b3 because of bishop takes d7 checkmate. So yeah, so after queen to b4, bishop takes f6 would follow, and as we can see already, this rook is looking really sorry on d7, and we're seeing that queen takes doesn't work because of the checkmate. Pawn takes, yeah, it doesn't really help because of this move, and bishop takes d7. After bishop takes d7, if he goes here, well, there's queen takes f7 followed by queen e8, and there's also discovered threats on the king. All right, so back to the game. So after this rook d1 move, black couldn't find anything better than to play queen to e6 coming out of the pin. But here, this is the last point bit in the combination. White just goes bishop takes d7, check. The knight is forced to capture. And now we see a pretty sequence that leads to mate. So queen to b8 check. The king's got nowhere to go, so the knight has to capture the queen. And now we see this beautiful, beautiful checkmate. Yeah, so this was a beautiful game between Paul Morphy and the two amateurs, Duke Karl and Count Isouard. And it just demonstrates the possibilities for white if black plays the Philidor defense the way the Duke and Count played it in this game. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Please don't forget to subscribe and see you on the next one.